The Blaze Radio Network. On demand.
The best of the Glenn Beck program.
Glenn Beck.
Nobody likes a bully. I mean, even bullies dislike bullies. They dislike themselves. And that is the reason why they're bullies to begin with. They dislike themselves. They don't feel anything. They want other people to feel the same. The left has especially made it their mission to eradicate bullies, which is noble, but I haven't bought it from them, and I don't agree with their tactics of eliminating it. But they tend to be blind or unaware of their own habitual bullying. That is the real problem. Ideologically speaking, they're trying to get rid of bullies by being a bully. They will bully anyone who even remotely disagrees with their rigorous code of conduct, even their fellow leftists. They are eating themselves now. As if we need more examples, here's one coming out of Arizona. Arizona congressional candidate, her name is Anna Kirkpatrick. She is a Democrat. She was booed repeatedly, you could say, I guess, bullied, for condemning Maxine Waters' recent call for people to bully Trump administration officials. Yes, she was bullied by the anti-bully people for stating that bullying is wrong. You do the math. She was heckled and booed again when she raised her hand in support of Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, ICE. Listen.
So I just want to be really clear. If you would have declared your support for ICE agents without any increased oversight. Okay. Would you have supported Democratic leadership in condemning Ms. Waters' comments?
She's the only one on this panel of Democrats that raises her hand. What explains this cognitive dissonance? Well, it is this one word, and we all need to learn it, and it is called postmodernism. Obviously, the issue is incredibly complex, but incidents like the one in Arizona will only continue to perplex and annoy us until we get to the root of the problem, which, as I said, is exceedingly complicated, but it is important to understand. This is the new progressivism. Progressivism now has been eclipsed. And just like when I said years ago that Woodrow Wilson, you have to understand what happened to Woodrow Wilson and what he did to be able to understand today. You need to now understand postmodernism because it is what is being fought in our universities and in our media and on the streets. It is the foundation of modern leftism. It was designed by leftist radicals, and nearly every single one of its followers is radically left-leaning. It's what allows for the nonsensical world that they have created around them. Stephen Hicks, he wrote this great book called Explaining Postmodernism that everybody should read. Quote, postmodernism is not a leap of faith for the academic left, but instead a clear-eyed political strategy that uses relativism but doesn't believe it. This relativism is what allows them to get away with the contradictions that we all see. And we're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. They know that. Hicks, again, quote, contradiction is a psychological form of destruction, but contradictions sometimes do not matter psychologically to those who live them. Because for them, ultimately, nothing matters, end quote. Postmodernists have developed a system without any logic or any reason, and it is what your children are being taught. It is the political and cultural equivalent of a boxer putting razor blades in his boxing gloves. Much of what allows them to get away with this rhetoric is this. part of what Hicks describes as Machiavellian postmodernism. He says, Machiavellian postmodernists say they want equal respect for all cultures, but that's not what they want. What they really want in the long run is to suppress the classic liberal capitalist one. End quote. That's it. That's what's behind all of this. So now, are we going to engage in the same kind of postmodernist hypocrisy where there is no truth, there is no right or wrong? Leftists want to take down capitalism and the Western world, and conservatives and classic liberal principles. They're going to do whatever they have to do to accomplish this delusional goal. But if we're not careful, that delusion becomes a reality. Bullying becomes the norm. And the real bullies don't stop until the world as we know it is smoldering in a pile of ashes.
Glenn Beck.
Now look, we need to have actual conversations, not knee-jerk conversations. But if, you know, the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights was written for a serious people. It's not written for, you know, people who are just in an argument at a bar going, rights. That's not what this is about.
So many of the arguments that formed it were actually made in bars,
yes,
oddly.
Correct.
Yes.
Most of them were made in churches,
yes,
however,
many.
from the pulpit.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a serious conversation. And it revolves around, who do you want to be? What are we? What do you want the future to be? Now, I know it feels good to win. Feels good to win. But you can't dip your toe into fascism. And I mean, I hate to keep going back to Star Wars, but you can't feel the power of the dark side and then go, I'm only going to use this on weekends. You will eventually be consumed by the dark side. So once you feel the power, you are not going to let it go because it's fun to destroy, apparently.
And is it a win? I mean, is this a win?
No.
Where you're what?
It's not for the Constitution.
You're
not
getting
for people.
A guy fired from a movie that made jokes like, I mean, I guess you're punishing him for some wrong that he's done, which I think it's legitimate. He was completely wrong on the Ben Shapiro thing, but I mean, is that the win that you feel? Because it didn't do anything for you. It didn't do anything for quote unquote our side. It just punished someone for doing something that we don't like.
So now people will say, well, where were you on Roseanne Barr? Same place. I'm glad that she is no longer around, but it's a selfish reason. Honestly, here's my reason I'm glad Roseanne's not around. Because I'm afraid that too many people, and this is really wrong of me, and I know this, I'm afraid too many people would have started liking what she said and thinking, well, she speaks for me. She's a crazy person. She is a crazy communist who has called for the guillotine on bankers, and she wasn't joking. Okay, she's crazy. She should not have been anywhere near a television room in the first place.
And my selfish reasoning for that is I'm glad she's not around because her association became with the right.
That's what I mean.
Like it's frustrating to see her out there as a spokesperson of conservatism. All
she's
of a sudden.
not.
This person who ran as a socialist for president of the United States in 2012.
Right. She's not. She's not helping.
No,
she's not helping. So that was my selfish reason. But if I had to make the decision, if I'm Ben Sherwood and I'm sitting at ABC, I don't hire her in the first place.
Right.
But he did. Okay. Now, what are you going to do? Well, now you have to answer your shareholders. Disney doesn't allow anything to hurt the mouse. So, of course, Disney fires her. Of course. And they have every right to fire her. The same thing with James Gunn. What is he going to do? They don't want another hassle. They don't want to be saying that they've got somebody who's a pedophile and blah, blah, blah. So, because that's what the right is saying. So they fire him. Well, first they come for the trade unionist. Then they come for somebody else that you're not a part of group of. And then somebody else. And then somebody else. By the time they come for you, there's nobody left. That's what that poem means. You have to stand for the person you are not with. And you better do it early.
I tend to agree with what you're saying here. This idea, this is, I think, the most interesting conversation that we should be having on the right now, which is this. And this is all from our perspective. The left introduces a ridiculous new standard, a standard of behavior. Okay, this was the easiest example since we're talking about it, that old jokes should be, and old comments that are taken out of context, some of which you've already apologized for, should be brought up multiple years later to get you fired from your current job. Okay, there's that standard. The left brought that up with Ben Shapiro. All right, so Ben Shapiro should be targeted because of these old comments. And we all agree, and we get defensive of Ben Shapiro and say that standard is ridiculous. We shouldn't use that standard. It's a dumb standard, and Ben should not have these problems. And we all agree on the right that is a dumb way of doing business. Okay? The question is, we have a part in the road at that time. Do we say and try to make the point that you can use this against anybody? And it's wrong to use, and we should stand up for James Gunn, even though we don't like James Gunn. He's a bad guy.
He tried to take down Ben Shapiro. Right. He was the guy who led that.
So should we stand up for him and say, look, we think this standard is bad, and therefore we should not apply it to James Gunn. And here's the point, liberals, understand this. It shouldn't be applied here because we can apply this to everybody. And we should make a stance here on principle. The standard you've tried to implement is wrong, and I'm standing up against it.
Okay.
Or do we go the other way and codify the standard and say, you have set this standard, liberals, we're letting you control the way this is all going to be litigated. You have set the standard, therefore we're using that standard, and we're going to attack everyone on the left with the same crappy standard we say we don't like. And that is a real argument in right-wing conservative media right now.
Here is the argument. I would be more open to that argument if everyone knew that that's what we were doing. But that's not what happened.
No.
If everybody on the right said, look, this is a ridiculous standard, and you said these things about Ben Shapiro, so look what we can do. You said these things, well, you said this in 2008. What a bad person you are. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Except what happened was the right started this, and then it just spiraled out of control. I would bet most people, if they even know about the James Gunn thing, most people think that this has nothing to do with Ben Shapiro and Mark Duplass. Remember, this started with Mark Duplass trying to do the right thing by saying, hey, we should open up our minds and listen to each other. Okay? That's what started this. Most people don't even know that. They just see this guy who was working for Disney. He's making all these pedophile jokes. And nobody makes pedophile jokes. You got to be a pedophile to make pedophile jokes.
Yeah, and first of all, that's a completely ridiculous point. This idea, and the right embraces this even more than the left. There aren't areas that you have to avoid with comedy. There are no exceptions to this. The Producers is a comedy about glorifying the legacy of the Holocaust. Is there any darker thing than that?
Glorifying the rounding up of Jews and Hitler.
And murdering them. It's a comedy about that. If you can cross that line, you can cross any line.
Well, that's only because Mel Brooks hates Jews.
No, does he?
Yeah, he was just doing this. He was just doing this because he secretly hates Jews and loves Hitler.
Yeah, I mean, It's absurd. We all know that's not true.
Yes.
And we all know what his motivation is because, in the darkest parts of life, it lives the best comedy many times. And the idea that you can't go to certain areas for comedy is something that unfunny people say.
Yeah, and who are you to judge? You judge for you.
Right. If you want to listen to that stuff, fine. If not, fine. I mean, 2 shows, huge hits, on the air right now, 2 of the longest running comedies on television right now. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and Family Guy. Both of them feature prominent characters that run throughout the entire series that are clearly pedophiles.
What?
And they constantly are making pedophile jokes. They are constantly, Herbert in Family Guy is constantly creeping up on Peter's son, and it's clear his intent constantly is to molest children. That is his entire role in the series, is to make pedophile jokes all the time. And by the way, he's one of the most beloved characters on the show and is hilarious. Jack Kelly, Charlie Kelly's uncle, he's known for 2 things. 1, having very abnormally small hands. And 2, clearly has at some point either molested Charlie or really wanted to molest Charlie and has molested many other children. Now, that does not mean we think child molestation, the actual act, is funny. The joke is about how ridiculous these people and characters are. It's mocking these things. Was Mel Brooks, for example, was Mel Brooks glorifying the Holocaust? No, he was mocking it, and he was mocking more than that, the lengths a desperate person in desperate need of money would go to line his pockets. Right? This bad person who would make a play glorifying Hitler to try to come up with the worst play. I mean,
but he was also taking the power away from Hitler by making pedophile jokes. It takes the power away from the pedophile.
Yeah.
Now you can say that it normalizes it, and you know what? You're probably right. If it wasn't creepy.
It is.
If the characters are creepy, it doesn't normalize it.
Right.
If they're fun and you love them because they're funny and you don't find what they're doing or talking about when they're talking about wanting to molest a kid creepy, then it normalizes.
Right. And we've talked about this with plural marriage, right? There have been shows that have glorified it and made it seem normal, and it's tried to normalize the behavior, right? That is not what is happening with these characters or the jokes that have been made. They're creepy. They make you feel internally awful, which is what's kind of funny. It's cringe humor, right? It makes you immediately repel from it. And there is nothing wrong with that.
How many times have you heard a comedian make a joke and then the audience groans and they say, "Oh, really? Too far? That one was too far?"
Exactly.
That's what these are. Now, you don't have to listen to them. You don't have to like them. I don't like them. But I'm a guy with a very dark sense of humor.
Yes.
Only my friends and my family know how dark my humor is. It used to come out on the air a lot, but it doesn't anymore because no one has a frickin' sense of humor. Nobody can handle it. And it's not the right that can handle it.
It's the left.
It's the left.
These are
that
all
can happen.
left-wing tactics.
Correct.
Which, again, that's, I think, the central point is. These are all left-wing tactics. That used to be something we weren't proud of. As conservatives, we wouldn't want to use the left-wing tactics. We wouldn't want to embrace them because it's one of the things we don't like about progressivism. Media matter. I mean, people are like, "Oh, well, James Gunn, I can't believe he's being targeted." It's just Media Matters. They're just doing what Media Matters has done for years and years and years and years. It's the exact same, I believe, crappy tactic.
Yeah.
Taking things out of context intentionally, using things in ways that we know they weren't intended. And that is something that we, for years and years, have looked down upon as what a pathetic use of your time.
Yes, but Stu, it works, and we're losing. Well, I will tell you this. You will train yourself to think that way. Yeah. You will train yourself to think if you win by using those tactics, then you will have to become a fascist to hold on to your power. Mm-hmm. The only reason they have nothing. They have nothing. They're not convincing. They're not winning the hearts over people. They are indoctrinating and they are bullying. We have the right message. We are bringing people over from the left. They are coming, not from the far left. Democrats are coming. The people from that consider themselves classic liberals who have always found a home with the Democrats are coming. They're not coming to the Republicans. They are coming and saying, I can't live this way. It doesn't make any sense. We must show them there is a different way. And that way is the Bill of Rights. And if you don't stand for someone's right to say things that are horrible, to believe things that you disagree with, then the Bill of Rights mean nothing. And, well, the government, Bill of Rights only for the government. The Bill of Rights is a principle that we all hold. Bill of Rights should be what we look to and say, yes, that is our governmental manifestation of what we believe. If we don't practice it in our own homes and in our own lives, they are certainly never going to enforce it in government.
Glenn Beck.
Does it feel like you can't keep track of arguments anymore? Because nobody seems to really actually believe what they're saying. It is because of something called postmodernism. Postmodernism is really quite diabolical. Anybody who believes in postmodernism or buys into this or is teaching this in universities, I can't come up with another word for you. Well, I mean, synonyms. Evil, destructive, anarchist. It is this idea that there is no truth. There is no truth. It's all subjective. And so the only truth that is true is the truth that takes apart capitalism, the Western world, the patriarchy, whatever it is. Now, this is a very leftist idea, and so it is anything that challenges or destroys the power structures is true. Anything that doesn't is not true. However, remember, there is no truth. Sound a little chaotic? Let me show this to you. Let me show you how crazy things have become. The New York Times and Mark Zuckerberg. Where do you think the New York Times would stand, traditionally speaking, about Mark Zuckerberg?
Usually aligned with him, you'd think, right?
Mm-hmm. And the charge against Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook from the right
is they're censoring conservative content.
Okay, and the left says they're not doing that.
Right.
Right? Okay. So, have you ever listened to The Daily?
A couple times, I think.
Yeah, okay. So The Daily is a podcast from the New York Times, and if I get up early enough, I listen to a few minutes of The Daily once in a while. This one I listened to because it was about policing at Facebook. And the New York Times was talking to one of their experts at the New York Times on the internet, and they were talking about going out and meeting with Zuckerberg about fake news. So here's a room full of journalists, and they discuss how they are going to go get rid of fake news and how difficult this was. Now, there was this 9-minute film that they apparently played, and in it, they basically said, we can't judge what's fake and what's not fake. It's not our position to do that. It's subjective and it's also global. Now, this is exactly what Mark Zuckerberg told me when he was telling the conservatives, we're not targeting you. We don't want to be in that business. It's not our business, and it would cut our business in half in America if we did that. So we don't want to do that. And nobody believed him. Now, here comes the left, the mainstream media. And he says the same thing to them, and they don't believe him. Now, listen to this conversation. This is from The Daily, the podcast. The New York Times, the interviewer you're going to hear in the studio is the male voice, is the New York Times reporter. The female is another New York Times reporter from an earlier interview with Mark Zuckerberg at the New York Times. Now, listen to what they're saying.
Someone was saying to me, you can't just pass power along. You have an enormous amount of power. Do you understand that, or do you think about that, or you don't think you have?
No, I think we have a big responsibility,
Mark Zuckerberg.
But I'm not sure what you mean by pass power along, but I actually think one of the things that we should be trying to do is figure out how to empower and build other institutions around us that are important and can help figure out these new issues on the internet.
And he keeps saying, I think about it as a responsibility. He says he's very uncomfortable with the idea that he is the most powerful, one of the most powerful people in the world. And he keeps insisting, I want to empower other people. I don't want to be the emperor on the throne. I want to give other people the ability to govern their own communities and lives.
Let's talk about InfoWars. Let's use them as the example.
Sure.
Make the case for keeping them and make the case for not allowing them to be distributed by you.
Kara and Mark start talking about InfoWars. And
we feel like our responsibility is to prevent hoaxes from going viral and being widely distributed.
Okay.
So the approach that we've taken to false news is not to say you can't say something wrong on the internet, right? I think that would be too extreme. Everyone gets things wrong, right? And if we were taking down people's accounts when they got a few things wrong, then that would be a hard world for giving people a voice and saying that you care about that. But at the same time, I think that we have a responsibility to, if you look at the top 100 things that are going viral or getting distribution on Facebook within any given day, I do think we have a responsibility to make sure that those aren't hoaxes and blatant misinformation. So
Kara asked Zuckerberg about Sandy Hook and the massacre that happened there.
Okay, Sandy Hook didn't happen is not a debate. It is false. You can't just take that down.
I agree that it is false.
And this was really sort of InfoWars' flagship issue for years. What they were known for was their promoting of a conspiracy theory that Sandy Hook had been a hoax. And
I also think that going to someone who is a victim of Sandy Hook and telling them, hey, no, you're a liar, that is harassment, and we actually will take that down. But overall, let's take this a little closer to home, right? Okay. So I'm Jewish.
And then he unprompted sort of brings up this example of the Holocaust.
And there's a set of people who deny that the Holocaust happened, right? I find that deeply offensive. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that our platform should take that down, because I think that there are things that different people get wrong. I don't think that they're intentionally getting it wrong, but I think that
in the case of the Holocaust deniers, they might be. But go ahead.
It's hard to impugn intent and to understand the intent. But I just think, for as abhorrent as some of those examples are, I think the reality is also that I get things wrong when I speak publicly. I'm sure you do. I'm sure a lot of leaders and public figures who we respect do too. And I just don't think that it is the right thing to say we are going to take someone off the platform if they get things wrong, even multiple times. So
he's essentially appealing to ideas that we've developed in our democracy over hundreds of years, I mean, he's saying that's the way we think about free speech is the way the U.S. government thinks about free speech. There's no rule that has to be the case. There's no reason he has to say, we're going to draw the line on free speech here as opposed to somewhere else. That's a choice that he's making, and I think that's sort of a way of avoiding the choice altogether, is just to say, well, free speech is protected in the public sphere, so we're going to protect it in largely the same way on Facebook.
Okay, so
wow, was a lot there.
A lot to unpack here, but I want to start at the end. Here's the New York Times chastising him for saying, he's essentially appealing to the notions that we've developed over the past several hundred years through our democracy. No, actually, this happened before our democracy. It was called the Enlightenment. Okay? A case for reason. It was called the Enlightenment. It's what liberals claim they are. Classic liberals. Liberalism means I believe I need to manage my life. You need to manage your life. I'm not going to impose my feelings onto you.
It's, of course, changed over the years into something completely different. Liberalism means something totally different today.
Classic liberalism. So here's the New York Times fighting against classic liberalism, fighting against the things that the ACLU always said they stood for. But we all knew that was a sham. Now here's the New York Times fighting against it and saying that there's no reason why he has to do that. I mean, say, well, think about it the way the U.S. government thinks about it. No, I don't even think the U.S. government thinks it that way. But people who believe in what brought us into the modern world, the Enlightenment, yes, they do think that way. And notice they say, he just doesn't want to make a decision. No, he is making a decision. He's making the decision that Facebook has a responsibility for things that are not truth to make sure that they don't go viral. But it is not their job to silence people because of the truth. If I may quote the left, whose truth? We would respond, the truth. There's only one truth. You want to have that argument with a postmodernist? Because the only truth to a postmodernist is the one that destroys the system.
We just had this past weekend had a couple of relatives in town that we hadn't seen in a while. And it's like, those are moments like you take pictures, you have that moment of like, hey, when's the last time we were all together? It's been a while. And then you have that moment and then most of your family gets wiped out in some ridiculous incident like this. Really terrible.
You were up in New York. You went up to see the World Trade Center, the museum. I have not been in. I saw the first museum where it was just a makeshift across the street.
Okay.
But I haven't seen the new completed museum.
Yeah, there's been a lot of criticism, I feel like, of that because the process was so ridiculous and it took so long to kind of come together. We talked about this back in the day. One of the first people who was saying, like, Donald Trump was like, well, we should build the towers twice as high. It was something we could kind of all cheer about. This is back long before, obviously, he was a presidential candidate. And it was, but like the process took forever. The building took a long time to be put up. The memorial took forever to put together. I got to say, it was pretty impressive. They did a good job with it. You may have seen the waterfalls that fall into each other where the actual footprints of the towers. But underneath that is where the museum is. So the entire museum's underground. And you go all the way down to sort of bedrock level. And under that, you can see they built the outlines of where the towers were. So you can kind of get a sense of how big they were and exactly where they are. So the entire time you're in the museum, you're walking in between the two towers and where they stood. And you can see, there's an exposed slurry wall there, which is the wall that separates the Hudson River to where you're standing. That's how crazy this thing was. And they show, they have, of course, all the bent steel and the fire trucks that were, partially crushed. And, really, it's just awful. There's an entire room of just, the minute by minute ticker of what happened that day. The first thing you see as you walk into the museum is a picture from 8:30 in the morning from Jersey of the towers 6 minutes before they're hit, of like what it was like that morning. It's this beautiful morning. We all kind of remember that. There's not a cloud in the sky. Towers are still standing. Everything's fine. And then 6 minutes later, all this happens. But you go through this one path where they walk you through minute by minute. And the NBC coverage, which is now even more bizarre, was Matt Lauer, right? Matt Lauer on the Today Show. And they actually got the news about the World Trade Center being hit and thought they had pictures of it and actually went to commercial. I mean, think about how strange that is. Matt Lauer's like, oh, well, we got something's happened at the World Trade Center. Do we have we don't have them yet? We're going to go to commercial. We'll be back in a minute. And then they came back for the part that you've probably seen, because MSNBC reruns that coverage over and over again, or used to.
Were we on the phone?
We were on the phone, yeah.
So
preparing the show.
Yeah, so I remember I was in the bathroom and I heard Katie Couric say, and a plane just hit the World Trade Center, and we don't know what kind of plane it was, probably a Cessna. I mean, because you could avoid that, blah, blah, blah. And I remember I'm brushing my teeth and I'm listening to it, and I go into the living room and I look at the hole and I'm like, that's not a Cessna.
No.
And they're not saying that yet. And I think I called you and I said, something big is happening here. And we were talking about, okay, well, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not freak out. And wham, the second one hit.
Yeah. Yep. And that, amazing. I mean, they had all the footage, some views that I had never seen of some of it. They had, the voicemails from the people on the planes. I mean, it was really, a lot of it was really tough to get through. Maybe the craziest thing actually wasn't about 9/11, though, that they had there, because it's the World Trade Center. It's a World Trade Center memorial. It's not really a 9/11 memorial as much as it's a World Trade Center memorial. And there were 2 terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center in the 1993 bombing, which is one that kind of gets forgotten for obvious reasons. But the craziest thing maybe the craziest thing they had on display was the guy who was responsible for the World Trade Center bombing. If you remember, he had a rented truck. He pulled it in, and the idea was he was going to blow up the parking garage. It was going to make one of the towers fall and knock over the other one. It was like an attempt at dominoes, essentially, on a really large scale. Obviously, that didn't wind up happening, but they didn't know who did it, and it wasn't. It was because the guy who was responsible kept going back to the rental truck place to get his deposit back.
Oh, my gosh.
He kept going back to get the deposit back, $400 deposit on a rental truck, and kept going back and trying to get it and arguing with them, saying he argued that his van was stolen, and he was angry about it. And he kept trying to get his $400 back. In the rubble, they found the VIN number on the vehicle, and they were able to tie it to the rental truck and figure out that this guy was responsible. It's how they kind of took the whole thing down. In the museum, they have the VIN number they found in the rubble on display.
Wow.
Which is pretty incredible. But, a $400 deposit, this guy may have been able to get away. We may have never been able to, give him the justice he deserved.
Did they, by any chance, find the Dick Cheney fingerprints or anything like that?
No.
They didn't.
No.
Huh.
Oddly enough.
It's weird because I've just, we just played that thing from the New York Times where they said, InfoWars really made their mark, their flagship was Sandy Hook. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. The flagship really was the World Trade Center, and that it was a hoax, and that 9/11 was an inside job, and Dick Cheney blew it up, as well as Katrina and the levees. Those were also blown up by Dick Cheney and George Bush. I don't know, in frogman gear or something like that. Yeah. So they didn't have that.
I was kind of wondering if they might address some of that, because there's so many pieces of evidence that disprove that narrative there, right? But again, they didn't. I think that was the right thing to do. It's too classy a joint, right?
Too classy
a joint.
This is a classy joint you got down here on the ground. Huh?
But again, remember that more than half of Democrats believed in the Alex Jones conspiracy theory that George W. Bush was behind the 9/11 attacks. More than half of them in that period did. And it shows the power of partisanship, right? We act as if this is some new thing, and the left is like now trying to say, well, look at this. You know, they're spreading all this fake news around, and all these dumb conservatives and Republicans are believing it because they love Donald Trump. More than half, not 10%, more than half of Democrats in a neutral survey said they believed that Bush was complicit in the 9/11 terror attacks. I mean, that is an incredible thing, and that was... It was one of the problems I had with that clip because they bring up multiple people and they say, well, look at these, and they give them as examples of right-wing fake news people. All of those people are left-wing people. They're all big government people. They're all people who believed the exact opposite when it was convenient for them to do so.
When it was George W. Bush, they were absolutely against him.
They were snuggling up to Cynthia McKinney, who ran as a Green Party presidential candidate, who is at least a socialist. I mean, to the left of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to the left of Bernie Sanders, and he was snuggling up to them. So, I mean, this is not believing in crazy conspiracy theories, believing in fake news that supports your worldview is not something that has anything to do with it's not fresh on the shelf.
You see what James Comey did this weekend? He came out and said, Democrats, don't. What are you doing? Stop running to the extreme. Stop running to the Democratic Socialists.
Yeah, that's odd. It's an odd moment. And a lot of the people on the left are like, yeah, James, we don't really want your help. We've seen what you do, and we don't really want your help. This is a good thing for Republicans. You know, every once in a while I get, the news cycle hits you and you're like, gosh, this doesn't seem like it's going well. And then you remember how bad the Democrats are at this. I mean, the idea that they're running their answer to Donald Trump and the things that they don't like on the right is to say eliminate ICE. Like, that is such a bonkers idea that the American people will never support. To have no border security, to have no way to process illegal immigrants or legal immigrants. Honestly,
they're moving so far to the left that there's no place for them to go. I mean, they have. We knew under Obama that they had bedded the radicals, but you couldn't point. Well, that was just fringe. No. They have fully embraced that now. They fully embraced the fringe and the Democratic Socialists. You have to remember, there were 45,000 registered Democratic Socialists. 45,000. It seems like a lot until you remember 330 million. When you think that that won't even fill the average football arena. 45,000. I mean, that's where you're banking on that message?
Glenn Beck.
All right, so when you look at the news, you can look at it and say, I want to be outraged about something. I want to be proven right about something or whatever. Or you can look at the news and say, okay, what do we do about this? And I'd like to address this FISA story with that attitude. First of all, let me give you the update. Remember the House Intelligence Committee? They had a game of dueling partisan memos. The Republicans claimed that the FISA warrant to surveil Carter Page, Trump's former advisor, was obtained using unverified information, the Steele dossier. And immediately the Democrats said, that is ridiculous. We would never do that. He is endangering national security. And they said that the FISA application that they had was based on several things, not just the Steele dossier. Okay. At the time, I said, okay, well, if that's true, then we have to see the actual FISA warrants. That's the only way to know the truth. Until we get our hands on the original FISA documents, you can't know. Well, that seemed like a pipe dream when I said it, but that all changed Saturday after the Trump administration released 400-plus page application with heavy redactions. Now, this is the first time in 40 years we've been given access to the justification to authorize surveillance on an American citizen. And only one word can describe it, and it is this: terrifying. We're supposed to be living under a system of checks and balances. For example, if a high-ranking member of the DOJ or FBI has it in for you, there's supposed to be a check and balance in place to protect you. That's where, the court comes in. Well, after reading the Carter Page FISA application, the only thing I can see is an out-of-control FBI and DOJ and a sham of a court system greenlighting whatever comes across their desk. The Republican memo appears to be exactly correct. This warrant was based almost entirely on the Steele dossier. Now, besides the dossier, there were two other instances referenced as part of the FBI's case. The first one was a 5-year-old dead case where two Russian intelligence agents looked into using Page as a source. But they literally called him an idiot and moved on, and the case went out. The FBI didn't see Page as a threat, but suddenly this old case, which they threw out, was brought up again in a FISA court years later. The second thing used was a Yahoo News article. But guess who sourced the information to Yahoo News? As we pointed out then, and now verified, Christopher Steele, using the information from the unverified dossier, was the one who confirmed it for Yahoo News. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Steele was now working for and getting paid by the FBI. If you want to talk about, running an evidence circle, this is it. The wording of the entire application appears to be built to deceive. For instance, the words opposition research, never used. Well, that's what that is. Why is opposition research so important? Well, because that means it's raw data, the worst you can find on a candidate that you oppose. Candidate 1 is used quite a bit, and candidate 1 is obviously Donald Trump. But you never see the words candidate 2 or anything else that identifies Hillary Clinton or the DNC as having anything at all having to do with the commissioning of this information. Well, now that seems kind of important, doesn't it? Now, keep in mind, this is October, and the election is just weeks away. Admitting information and writing words that make material seem softer has only one purpose, and that is to deceive. The FBI and DOJ were trying to deceive the FISA court. There's no other way to explain it, but I don't really even know if it made a difference. The court looks like they just rubber stamp these cases anyway. We've heard rumors that FISA warrants are overwhelmingly approved rather than denied. But this is ridiculous and unconstitutional. How many other Americans are being spied on right now based off of a political motivation? Or screw it, maybe even a grudge from some pissed off FBI or DOJ employee. FISA needs an audit. You want to know why this story matters and what you can do about it besides just yelling back and forth? It's the Democrats, it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats, it's the Republicans. Let's all stand up and demand a FISA audit now.
Glenn Beck.
The best of the Glenn Beck Program.
Glenn Beck.
The best of the Glenn Beck Program.